So hi everybody, I am calling you from Arizona. We are doing a Art of Desire workshop here, so Ruby and I just got back from that, and so I'm going to answer some of your questions. Okay, the first one I did say I would answer is a question that came in. This person says, I just finished your Strengthening Marriage course. It was very eye-opening. It's left me wondering how books like The 5 Love Languages and His Needs, Her Needs fit into the scheme of everything. So one thing I want to say is that I haven't read these books. I mean, I've been to like enrichment meetings and so on where somebody was teaching these ideas. So I may not be fair to these books because I haven't really read them. But my sense of them is that they are promoting a pretty typical idea. Someone says they can't hear me. I hope that's not still true. They're promoting a pretty typical idea, which is that love is about mutual need fulfillment. And that if you love someone and it's a good relationship, you each take care of the needs of the other person. So that's one of the kind of ideas that I think is very common in thinking about how relationships work well. And there are some therapies that are based on the idea of how do you become more what your spouse needs. And I think that while, of course, we clearly impact one another, and loving someone well and with sincerity will really bless their lives deeply, I think it's a flawed model of human relationship. Because if it's that you're both fundamentally need-based, and the good relationship is based on each handling the needs of the other person, it's not really choice and desire-based, which is what we really long for. And it's a way of obligating and pressuring people, right, rather than that they really choose to have you in their life. But the other really flawed part of it is the idea is if you are needy and you can't sustain your sense of self, from whence do you get the strength to manage somebody else, right? So, or to prop up their sense of self. And usually what actually happens in relationships is if you both have on half tanks, usually what it looks like is that one person has a full tank and the other one's depleted. So what often happens in partnerships when people are working from a limited sense of self is that the more demanding person pressures the more, what's the word I would use, the more anxious person to sort of prop up their sense of self. And so one person, it's kind of an over-functioning and under-functioning dynamic, but it's a failure on both sides to self-regulate well and effectively. Oh, good. Someone's saying they can't hear me. Okay. Someone's saying they can't. I wonder what's going on. You can hear me fine. Okay, good. All right. So, and so I think that's a problematic model. And I think that the more what I'm teaching in the courses is the idea that learning to self-regulate and sort of anchor more into your own integrity and your own sense of self allows you to be able to really choose another person, not because you need them to manage your sense of self, but because you have the ability to want an intimate relationship, which is to share yourself and to know them, to know and be known by them. And so that's not driven by neediness, it's driven by strength and desire. And that's really at the core of passionate relationships. It's easy to want to gravitate to someone around need. You are either looking for someone who will prop up your sense of self and make you feel good, or you are looking to be needed by someone as a way of trying to guarantee a less vulnerable position. So a lot of us partner around neediness. It's a kind of lower level development way of doing it, but if we stay in that model, the relationship will crumble under resentment, even if you never get divorced. So, so that's one issue I have with the foundational ideas of some of these types of books. But the other one that I have is it's based on the idea that people basically love each other, but they're just speaking different languages. So it's sort of a Tower of Babel kind of idea that, you know, you're busy giving gifts, trying to love, and the other person's wanting physical intimacy to feel loved, and you're both well-intentioned, but you're missing each other. And, you know, some of that can happen, of course, because people are different and they desire different things and they feel cared about in different ways. So to the degree that the book's helping you kind of know who your spouse is better, I think that's fair. It's just a way of understanding where that person's coming from. But the answer isn't in extracting the thing that you want from your spouse. The answer is more in the issue of self-regulation. So just to give you an example of this, two things that were playing into me wanting words of affirmation is that I came from a family that, because of my mom, had a tradition of saying what we loved about the person whose birthday it is. And so I was accustomed to that idea. But on the other hand, I had a father who was slow to affirm and could be critical. And so so when I married John, who is not critical, but he's not verbally, you know, he doesn't gush, that's for sure, that I wanted him to solve the issue of my difficulty self-regulating. And so I would go and try and get him to be verbally affirming, tell me things he loved about me, tell me things that he was grateful for. And, you know, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the fact that that meant something to me and that I wanted it, and there was a sense to it given my history. But the more tyrannical I got, you know, in my way, I was like a huge tyrant or anything, but like I would be like, wait, why can't you do that? Why don't you do that? Like, you should do that more. I want you to do. And then John would like kind of cough out some things he loved about me. And, you know, it was under so much pressure because I'm trying to get him to manage my sense of self through that. And I think that's working the wrong muscle. That's the wrong issue. It's the wrong way of thinking about it. So in this case, you know, when I say that sometimes there's this idea I don't like is that everybody loves each other. They're just speaking the wrong language. Well, sometimes that's true. Okay. So, and in some sense with John, this was true. I realized, you know, I'm being too demanding. This isn't who he really is. He's not somebody who gushes. I dated people who did and were that way. It's not who I chose. And so I know this man loves me. He shows it to me in lots of ways, meaning it's just evident. I don't mean that I can translate the language. I can just tell this person is invested in my life, cares about my happiness. So give him a break. Like, stop making him manage my sense of self. I'm detracting from the relationship and I'm making him responsible for something that's not his job. And so I've got to settle myself down and just know that he cares about me because it was true. I'm not trying to convince myself of something that wasn't true. There was just plenty of evidence that he really carried me in his heart, even though he's a quieter soul. And so I just kind of let that go in a sense. Stop trying to get him to prop me up, which is a kindness. That's coming out of strength to make that decision. But the thing is that John also got more, first of all, it became easier to say kind things about me because it wasn't being demanded on threat of, you know, my happiness with him. I was just, you know, he knew it mattered or he knew I liked it. So it was easier to offer it when I wasn't demanding it. And so we actually, because he knew it mattered to me, I think, just more freely offered it as a way of understanding that means something to her, and I can do that. I can be inconvenienced for her sake. I think so I would say when you self-regulate better, see, I was self-regulating by not being tyrannical about it, and John was self-regulating by saying, well, okay, it's not natural to me, but I'm partnered with someone to whom it means something. And so that matters to me. If I'm going to love her well and I know who she is, then, well, I'll stretch for her benefit. And that's the way in which that has sense to it. So this idea of it, to the degree that it helps you kind of know who your spouse is, I think that's legitimate. But then there's sometimes when there isn't a lot of love and investment, and so we prefer the idea that they're just speaking the wrong language, or they're speaking a different language, rather than seeing that there may be operating somebody who doesn't want to be inconvenienced for their partner's sake, or they don't want to deal with aspects of themselves that the relationship would need in order to thrive. And so sometimes it's a way of trying to paper over a more fundamental lack of investment that's operating, when you can put it in the frame that everybody loves, but they're just the wrong language. Like, what was Hitler's love language, for example, So, sometimes that there is a real absence of investment and care, and people just want to do what's comfortable for them and not stretch. The other thing I would say is sometimes the thing that means the most to your spouse, or the love language they're the most concerned with, is the thing they're not getting. And that's not always true. You may not be somebody who cares about gifts or whatever how that's explained in the book. But, that sometimes it's the very thing you don't get that becomes your love language, because it's speaking to something in the relationship that's not being addressed or handled well. So anyway, that's my response to that. Now, when I finished teaching today, I said to Ruby, she said that the porn question was a big question on there, so probably be a good one for you to answer. And I said, no, I'm not answering that one. I can't. It's too loaded. There's too many things. And then as I was sitting here, I'm like, okay, maybe I will. But I'll tell you how I'm going to handle this question. I'm not going to give you the answers. What I want to do, because I'm working on this men's sexuality course, and I will be definitely taking up the topic of porn, and it's a big topic, and there's a lot of layers, and there's just no way that I can adequately address them in a Facebook Live. And if I only half address them, then that might upset a lot of people. Okay, so I don't want to half address it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to at least offer to the person posting the question questions that I think are worth looking at, because what often happens is we get caught in these scripts around porn addiction, betrayal, and they are scripts that keep us from maybe understanding what's operating in the marriage and how it can be better solved or better addressed. So I'm going to offer questions to the person who posted this question, but also to anybody who's grappling with some of these issues, to help you think about possibly how you can think about what's happening in a way that's more fruitful for you. So this person says, I'm in an uncomfortable situation and I don't really know how to proceed. My husband, who's been a longtime viewer of porn, left the church 4 years ago and decided there's nothing wrong with pornography. Okay, my first comment I would say about that is I think, now I may be wrong, that this person is still not necessarily clear about his own position around it. I may be wrong about that. He may be clear, but it feels like he may still be looking for the wife to be validating his ambivalence about his own behavior. Maybe not. That's just something that I thought as I was reading the question. Although I've made some successful headway in explaining to him that his porn use keeps him from being intimate with me because it leaves me feeling unfulfilled and undesirable, he still consistently uses. So here's some questions for you to think about. Okay, I'm just thinking about that statement. His porn use keeps him from being intimate with me. Okay, so here's some questions. How does his viewing porn make you feel unfulfilled and undesirable? Right, so you were saying when you were saying that his porn use keeps him from being intimate with me because it leaves me feeling unfulfilled and undesirable, I would want to understand, if I were sitting with you, how does his viewing porn make you feel unfulfilled and undesirable? What's happening that this is how you feel? Okay, and this is a very important question. A lot of us think, well, duh, of course you're going to feel that way if he's looking at other people. Isn't this a statement about you? And it could be it's a statement about you. but it may not be a statement about you, and it might be your own response to the sense of invalidation or threat of seeing anyone else as attractive. And so I'm not saying what your response should be around this, but more what is happening that this is how you feel. Okay, is it that your husband generally doesn't concern himself with his impact on you, right? And porn is one iteration, right? Is it that he does whatever he wants and porn is just one more version of that? Or is it that you find his viewing to be challenging to your sense of being sufficient? Because I would be interested in the idea, very sincerely, as does your husband view you as insufficient? So whether or not porn is in the picture, like if porn and the whole industry blew up and became unavailable to your husband, does he view you as insufficient? And porn is one way he's expressing that sense that you're insufficient. Or does it make you feel that you're seen as insufficient? But you don't think that that's what's happening. So you may not like it, okay, but your husband this isn't a statement about you, okay, which is different than you should like it or that you should support the industry or anything like that. But is it the actual issue that you feel inside around it? Is that what's actually happening? Because if it is, it's really important. Because the issue isn't porn then, the issue is your husband's relationship to you that needs to be understood. So are you trying to earn sufficiency? Okay, and so are you because it does feel that way when you're saying, should I look at the porn that I found abhorrent? Are you generally trying to earn a sense of sufficiency in your husband's eyes? And how do you make sense of the fact that you're trying to do that? Right? Is that about your husband and how he relates to you? Is this about how you relate to yourself relative to your husband? Or both? And is this issue of porn one more exposure of that central dynamic and one more way that you're maybe trying to get over your feeling of insufficiency with him? Okay. So I think that I had another thought about that. It just went out of my mind. Just a second. Okay. Or also the question is maybe he doesn't, well, I'll come to that because I think you bring up something else that points to this. So the person goes on to say, he does make a consistent effort to forego viewing in order to connect with me sometimes. Okay. So again, I would just want to understand what that means. Because is he saying, if I look at it, I feel less connected to you, therefore I'm going to stop looking at it so I can be connected? Or is he saying, if I look at it, you don't want to have sex with me, you feel too hurt, so I will put it aside so that we can have sex? But it's not really about I'm confronting that I have a problem with porn or that I don't choose to do that, but more about trying to regulate you and your response to him and whether or not you're interested in him sexually. Okay. And does that then make you feel like you have some control? Because my sense from your question is you want more control over this than you have, and you're trying to figure out how to get that control. Okay. And if you're saying he's less able to connect with you if he's viewed it, what's the mechanism that's going on? Is he so in his head about the porn that he's not with you? And or is it that you are so hurt by it that you feel unable to regulate yourself and be comfortable being with him? You go on to say, he has admitted that his using can be harmful, quote unquote, at times. So I would be interested, what's his view of what is at times harmful about it? Because this speaks to some of his ambivalence about his own position. But I also know he still views regularly and finds ways to justify it. So again, I would be wondering, is he really looking for ways to justify it? Meaning, is he not being honest with himself? Is he wanting you to look at it as a way for him to feel more validated that it's okay and get away from his own difficulty with his behavior? Or is he actually wanting to have more of a truly shared experience with you, and you haven't been able to settle down your own response to it to understand how he views that? Okay, so again, there's just a lot of kind of assumptions in the questions, and I think you would do well to kind of tease it apart and get more information, even though that process would be stressful, because you're not going to have as much of a sense of control if you start to know your husband in this way. You may not like what you see. You may not like how it makes you feel a lack of control. You may not like your difficulty handling your own legitimacy when you know him better. But I think you owe it to yourself to know him better. I think you owe it to him. You go on to say, he now has gotten to a point where he's asking me to view with him. He's come to the conclusion this is part of his sexual makeup, and he knows he will always be curious as if what's out there. He'll always be curious as it's what's out there. I'm not sure what that means. And want to view. He'd rather view with me, but he will view anyway he can, with or without me. I have a problem with this. Pornography is repulsive to me and turns me off completely, not to mention is triggering to me, as it's one of the reasons my husband didn't choose me for years. Okay, so then here's my question. You're saying he didn't choose me because he was looking at pornography. Okay, that could be true. Okay, but I would want to know, is it because he was looking at pornography that was just a great substitute and he didn't want to invest in another person? Which is not usually the case, okay, because porn isn't a great substitute to a real person. Or was his pornography viewing a symptom of what was interfering with his desire to choose you? So I think, pornography is much more often the symptom of some process or reality that's going on within the person or within the relationship, and that it looks like, it is the problem. It is the thing that's creating the difficulty with intimacy. The pornography is creating the selfish person. But I think we have it backwards often, that there is a limitation or an issue, or, the pornography is an expression of something going on in the person. And what is it expressing? And I think we're so reactive to it that we don't often want to even look at that question. We'd rather say that the pornography is the infectious agent and it is the problem. Get rid of that and I'll have a loving, intimate partner. I don't think that's really the right view. So did he not choose you because he was looking at pornography, or was the pornography viewing a symptom of what interfered with choosing you, perhaps? Meaning that could be difficulty with self-regulation in his relationship with you. Maybe this is a difficulty of feeling he can be himself and be with you. Maybe this is about difficulty between you, and porn was a way to handle his emotions and step away from the challenges of the relationship or of the sexual relationship. What is it about, there's just something else there. I can't quite think of it yet. Just a second. So I think there's something about you and him that pornography is an easier thing to focus on than what's really happening between you, and to really see it. Let's see. Okay, and then this she goes on to say, however, another side of me realizes this is a huge way I can accept my husband's desires and make room for him. Okay, now I would say that's a very contradictory position, and I'm not saying it's the wrong idea, but it's a very contradictory idea. So I just want you to see that, because when you're making room for someone, you're making room for the best in them, okay, what you think is good in them. And so not making room for something that you think is driven by something ugly and dark. That would be stupid to make room for something ugly and dark. Okay, so you're saying it's all ugly and dark, and then you're saying, and I'm not saying, you're deluding yourself right here, but I think you're speaking to his inner conflict, which is there some way in which I don't want to make room for my husband, or there's something there that deserves some light and some air, and I'm so reactive to it that I shut it down. And that's possible, because there's something that appears to him that being with you feels less desirable to him sometimes than being with him and himself. And that could be just about his developmental issues, but it could be about something about the way the two of you are together that's hard for him. Okay. And then you go on to say, hang on, I'm going to find my... And then you go on to say, maybe he would stop viewing solo altogether and start realizing the blessings of true intimacy and vulnerability if you were to start looking at it. Maybe we would finally be united sexually. So I don't think that's very good thinking, because, well, if you're saying, I'd like to make room for a part of my husband that scares me and I want to better understand it, and I think that there's some strength there, but just because it doesn't validate me, I can't handle it, and I keep trying to control it and get away from it, then I would say, yeah, you might be right. I mean, that if there's something to really know and understand about him that makes more room for him in our partnering, I think that's wise. If you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do something that I think is abhorrent and disgusting, and I'm certain that I'm right about that, but I'm going to do it in order to like convince him that it's good to be with me, I think that's an idea of trying to get control of something. It's about trying to validate him into some kind of relationship with you. And I wonder if this trying to control something in your husband is part of your shared problem as a couple. Maybe you're each trying to get validation from each other by trying to regulate or pressure the other person's behavior to handle your own senses of self. And I think that's not the goal. It's not going to bring you where you want to go. I think what could help you, but it doesn't guarantee validation, it doesn't guarantee a closer relationship, but what could help you is dealing honestly with who your spouse is and how it intersects with your own difficulty handling your sense of self when you're with him. And being able to look honestly at yourselves and each other is the thing that will help you have more integrity in your relationship. It's the thing that will allow you to handle what you're doing and who you are. That's the thing you do have control over, rather than trying to control each other. I think the fantasy in your mind is the porn is the problem, and if I can control the issue of the porn, either by pressuring him away from it or participating with him in it, then I will get the husband that I want. And I think that's not the right way to think about it. I would say the more I can handle understanding who he is, what it means to him and why, what it is he wants from me around it, why didn't he choose me in the past, and what do I think, what is that about? What do I need to understand about him and me? And how do I want to handle myself better in a way that I would respect more? Because that's the only part you have control over. So you have to look more honestly at what's happening to know what is good and worthy between you and what isn't, and what you need to address in yourself to offer a clearer-headed response. So I know that might feel a little unsatisfying because I'm not doing a session with you and I'm not sitting here thinking about it with you. But so often we're trying to control our spouse, and our issues of our own validation of self are at the core of that attempt at control, rather than settling ourselves down and knowing this other person. And that can be scary because it means tolerating the invalidation of knowing them and tolerating the lack of control over them that we that is implicit to a relationship, and figuring out who you're going to be in the face of that. Okay, so let me just see what some people are saying. So it says the porn is the cough, not the actual cold. Yes. So I just listened to a podcast, and if someone can remember what his name is, he is a researcher at Idaho State, and talked about this idea that he was recently on the Mormon Marriages podcast, and really good interview and really worth listening to. He talks about his research on pornography and pornography addiction. Okay, thanks. It's Cameron Staley, Dr. Cameron Staley. And he talks about this idea that pornography is like if you have a cold and you have a cough. A lot of times people are trying to treat the cough as if the cough is the issue. And so because the cough, spreads germs and we don't like it, trying to control the cough rather than look at what's happening that the person's coughing. And this is his way of thinking about it. Like, what's going on inside this person that this becomes a way to relate to their sexuality, or that this has become compulsive for those for whom it has. Like, what's actually happening? Why is this person choosing it? And what is it expressing? And is there something there that needs to be dealt with and understood? But it's easy to focus on the part that scares us, the porn, and to make that be the problem rather than seeing what's there. And again, I think one of the reasons this kind of thing is so hard is because it feels threatening to us. One of the things that Dr. Staley, I can remember his name again, was talking about is that a lot of times, he hasn't had the presenting picture, meaning in couples therapy, where he's had the presenting reality of a woman who feels compulsive about her looking at porn, and a husband who doesn't look at it. But he hasn't had the presenting picture of a husband who feels very anxious and invalidated by it and is trying to get the wife to solve it because it interferes with his sense of self. And one of the ideas that was in the discussion was that oftentimes, we as LDS women are often given the idea that because we're naturally less sexual, which we're not, but the idea that we are, that we're the sober drivers, that we're basically partly responsible for men's sexual behavior. And so if we want to keep them from looking at porn or keep them on the true and righteous path, we have to contain and control our behavior and be the right kinds of partners or wife. So I think because we're trained up in that idea, the idea of porn can feel deeply invalidating of your worthiness or sufficiency, even if it's not about that at all for the man. And so I think a lot of women feel like it's sort of partly my responsibility to get this under control and to get this handled. I also think a part of it for a lot of us as women is that we see men's desire as non-discriminating, that men are just sexual. And so there's a lot of themes around women's fantasies and women's desires around sex of wanting to feel chosen, selected, valued above other options. That this person really knows me and chooses me is a really common and meaningful theme for a lot of women in sexuality. And so the idea of pornography can feel like very much an affront to that idea, that you really bring your sexuality to me. So it can feel so invalidating of that and so disorienting or disorganizing that it's really hard to settle down enough to understand what is happening in my spouse. Is it a function of our relationship? Is it? Or is it about something else? And what is it? And what is it that you're looking at? And why? And what does it mean to you? They're hard questions, but they're important questions to really know what's happening and if you have a role in it or not. I had another thought about that. Oh yeah, just another version of it going, the other way, which is that, I was talking to a client whose wife hasn't desired him for years, and he's very upset about it, and he feels really, distressed that she doesn't and wants her to get her sexuality fixed. It's sort of the same idea in reverse, like clearly this isn't about me, this is about you being broken sexually. And, I asked him, have you asked her why she doesn't desire you sexually? And his answer was, no, I haven't asked that. Okay, now this is an intelligent guy who'd be very good at solving problems on any other front. Pretty basic information if you want to solve your sexual challenges as a couple. But for similar reason that a woman may not want to understand why her husband is looking at porn or what's operating within him, may be similar in the opposite. Like, I don't want to understand why you don't have desire for me, because I may not want to see aspects of myself in it, in your low desire. I may not want to see parts of you that I don't want to see, right? I'd rather have an idea that the brokenness is outside of our relationship and me, and not look at my role in a problem that we are having. And so, okay, of course, I'm not saying that if a man's looking at porn that it's about the wife, okay? But I'm just saying sometimes the information that can help us, we're the most terrified to actually look at. And, as I've sometimes said to people, the thing that will most help us is often hidden in the place we least want to look. And so it's an issue of self-regulation and intimacy, because intimacy is about knowing each other, not just demanding validation, and marriage is going to challenge that issue every time. Good. So any other questions? I can see, oh, that sounds harder than blaming the porn. Yes, it is. Exactly. Okay, let me just see where we are for time here. Maybe I'll do one more question. This person just says, I'm going to pose a question I hope Dr. Finlayson-Fife might address. My husband was just offered a new job as a firefighter. This is the accomplishment of many years of effort, and we are thrilled. But we've been told repeatedly that the academy is all-engrossing. They refer to the spouses as work widows. It's probably only going to be super demanding for about 6 months, and the expectation is that he'll put in extra unpaid hours during that time every day. We've discussed the idea of having a schedule for sex. We're both physical touch people and need this connection. But there's something in me that just recoils at the idea. I can logically say that this is probably a good idea, and I know I've read other therapists who recommend it, but something in me just doesn't want to. Is this something she ever recommends? Jennifer, I guess. Okay. In the short term, relatively, and I recognize that this is a demanding time on our family. Are there any ideas of how I might have a change of heart so this doesn't bother me, or any suggestions? So I guess I would just say, why do you need to schedule it? I'm not saying you might not want to prioritize it if you have very limited time together. I'm just trying to make sense of why you would schedule it, because there is a way to relate to the idea of scheduling that I think can be fine, is that if you're like, look, I know that for me to really enjoy sex, I need to orient myself to it, and I need to, much like you would if you're dating, you say, okay, Friday night is our intimacy night. Meaning not that we have to have sex and it must happen, but it's the night we go out on a date, we go dancing, we do things together that are about our couplehood. And sex is a good part of that. And so we like that. And that doesn't mean it has to happen. It's just that it's a time to sort of orient to put the issue of parenting aside, the other demands, and we make space for ourselves. So in that sense, I think scheduling, I don't know if scheduling is the right word, because it's not like sex on demand. It's more like making space in your schedule to create room for your couplehood. I think that's very, very valuable, because, life puts so many demands on you, and it's easy to lose track of yourself as an individual in marriage and in family life, and it's easy to lose track of yourself as a couple in the demands of parenting. And so I think something that makes marriages and families stronger is making space for your couplehood and making space for your individuality. And so in that sense, I think it's valuable to schedule time as a way of saying I prioritize this. I think what you're recoiling from is not the idea that, hey, when you're here for a couple nights, let's go out and make time for us as a couple. I think what you're recoiling from is the idea that you have to have sex because it's Thursday night, it was put on the calendar. And I mean, I agree with that. It's taking it out of the frame of choosing and putting it into obligation, and it's not a great meaning frame for good sex. So I might be thinking about, is there anything that would preclude the two of you from just making it a priority? And is there something that would facilitate you making space for it, if it matters to both of you to make space for it? And what might facilitate that? But I wouldn't put it in the frame that now I must because it's on the calendar. I think that's the wrong framing. The other thing I would maybe be thinking about is, how does this question get obscured between you? So it feels like, I'm trying to think of what it is I can feel in it. It's like, it feels like that maybe knowing your spouse wants it, or the idea that he needs it, maybe is already a tempting idea in the marriage. So the fact that it could get punctuated through the busy schedule is something you're a little anxious about. So what I might be thinking about is, given our limited time together, what would make sex meaningful and good for me and him? What would make it feel special and not expected or rushed? And is there something that we could do that really is a way of protecting our relationship in this really busy, demanding time? Because we're both going to come together and be pretty depleted, probably you more than he will be, actually. And so if you have young kids and you're doing a lot of that kind of work. So I think I would just be thinking about it in terms of cultivating and creating space for something that you can both really be with one another. And if you feel like this idea of his needs starts to infect the time together, I would really be working on not sex. Why isn't she looking forward to it? That might be worth thinking about. Yeah, I agree with that. So, I think that, I just have to think about that for a minute. I think that's pointing to the same issue, which is that maybe it feels like because it's been written now, I have to sort of put out, and nobody wants that kind of sex. I think that if it's, I'm just thinking about it in my own relationship, because I really enjoy sex, and I never ever approach it from the idea, never once in my life have I approached it from the idea that my husband needs this and I should offer it to him. Thank goodness, that's why I like it. So so if my husband was like, okay, I'm only gonna be here on Friday, well, first of all, we wouldn't be putting it on the calendar, because it would be very obvious that we would both want to be together on Friday. So it wouldn't need to be on the calendar in the first place. And so the fact of putting it on there is a kind of move to obligate. I think that's really the issue. And that move to obligate then immediately infects it. And so I think if it's a shared decision, like we want it, then there's no need to put it on a calendar, really. And even if for some reason okay, we've got 17 things going on, we can only have sex between 10 and 11, let's put it on there so we don't, I don't know how you would forget, but anyway, so it happens. Well, it's still, I think if it's getting away from the I want it and you want it, it's going to be hard for it to really be about intimacy and pleasure. So it sounds like that's a dynamic that's operating underneath this, and that's why you're resisting the scheduling. And probably that's the dynamic that you most need to deal with. Other comments or thoughts? Why is my phone I'm always the one that's lagging. I don't know what it is.
Yours was more on it today than mine.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay. Anything else anyone wants to say? Okay. Oh, look at, I make a whole delayed thing. All right. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you in a few weeks. Okay. Bye-bye.